Let's get the latest here on day 3 of the training camp postponement. Farhan Lalji has been all over this from TSN, joins us from Vancouver. Farhan, day 3 of CFL training camp's postponement. What is the latest on the immediate future of the CFL?
Well, both sides are continuing to talk this week. I know they've been having kind of private discussions with various politicians, not in a big group setting quite yet in terms of what the next ask is going to be, but I think there is a hope that by the end of this week, they're going to be in a position to ask the committee that they get assigned to, right? Like, this isn't necessarily going to be an ask in front of Parliament again or in front of Justin Trudeau, but whatever parliamentary committee or department that's going to be dealing with this. I think there's going to be a small group discussion as early as the end of this week. And, the two sides are optimistic. It's the singular focus right now. I mean, they're not planning as they go through their modeling, as they go through the finances, what the ask would be, how the players would get treated in the event of no season. They're not going through that process right now. The ask is going to be about what it's going to require to play a season from a financial standpoint. And, both sides are kind of grinding, as it were, right? I mean, this seems to be the 11th hour of a CBA negotiation in many levels. It is that because that's part of the negotiation. So, they're optimistic. I just am curious to see what it's going to look like in terms of not just the ask, but then in terms of an eventual return to play program and what the mechanics of that look like. I mean, you saw a 67-page document for Major League Baseball and the amount of detail, painstaking detail they're putting together on what that would look like. I've been very curious from the outset, is the CFL capable of delivering on a plan that detailed?
When you said they're optimistic, are you saying they're optimistic they'll get federal aid or optimistic that they'll play?
Well, a bit of both, right? I don't know that you're going to get one without the other. I think they're optimistic that they will get some level of aid. Are they optimistic they're going to get their entire ask? I can't say that. But I do think that they're optimistic from the discussions they've had with individuals in government to this point. Since the parliamentary hearing, there have been one-on-one discussions or just smaller group discussions. Those things have happened. And basically the tone of those is, what can we do as a league and as a players association to make this work in the eyes of politicians and in the eyes of the general public, right? And so I think they've been given direction to come back with us with this type of format. And I do think there's a belief that if they handle it the right way, that they're going to be able to get something. Can I say that it's going to be 120 or 150? I can't say that, but could it be enough to get them through? We'll see. I do think there's a big fear factor, as I mentioned, as to what's going to happen on the other side if they don't find a way to play a season or half a season.
You really got tongues wagging with the report of the quarantine cities concept last week. How realistic do you think that is?
Truthfully, it depends who you ask. I'm not sure it is realistic. I do know it's been discussed because I think everything has to be discussed and all things are going to be on the table, right? And certainly if you look at potential quarantine cities, I think Regina's got to be at the top of the list just because of the fact that, there's no COVID there, relative to the rest of the country. And you've also got a passionate and committed fan base and a province and a city that's willing to do anything for the CFL, right? And that speaks volumes for the type of people and situation we've got in Regina. I mean, it's fantastic. So I think if there was a hub city, I couldn't imagine a situation where Regina wasn't one of them. But I do think logistically it's going to be really difficult. I think it makes a lot more sense financially and logistically for teams to play in their own city and to not have to try to work an arrangement where everybody's in a hotel, everybody's in a bubble, everybody's quarantined. You look at the baseball plan now, and you're not having to do that in your home cities anymore. You will have to certainly do that on the road, but on the road you're in a hotel anyway. But teams are going to be allowed to stay in their homes, and I think that's going to be the NFL model. I don't believe that'll be the NHL or the basketball model. But I just think when you've got rosters that are as big as they are in football and the logistics required to execute a hub city and the finances required to execute a hub city, I think in the end, I don't think that's a viable scenario.
You're just up the road from Seattle. Obviously, you love the University of Washington. I think you said that's your favorite stadium. You follow the Seahawks closely. How much are you following what they're doing? And can the CFL piggyback on what they're doing, or is it complete apples and oranges?
apples and oranges, my friend. Just when you look at the money involved and what they're going to try to execute, I think they can model timelines, and there's going to be certain elements of what the NFL attempts to do that they can model. I mean, I think they're looking at that right now in terms of opening up the practice facilities currently, and I think they're looking at some of that. But when it comes down to amount of testing and medical monitoring, I think there's going to have to be some modifications from a CFL standpoint. They simply can't afford to do the amount of testing both for coronavirus or COVID and for antibody testing. I think that'll be problematic. And I'm absolutely looking at everything, not just at what the NFL is doing, but what the NCAA is doing. And I think there's a few more similarities there, right? Just in terms of the NCAA has said, look, we need schools open. Now, what does a school open look like? That's up for debate, because I think initially there was a feeling that schools being open means classes are in session. Well, no, not necessarily. Now, you might be taking your classes virtually, but school could still be open in that, people are still living on dorms and things like that, and they're looking at modified attendance, right? And I mean, the NFL is doing the same as well. I think the CFL is going to try that. I'd be surprised if you saw empty stadiums across the board. You may see some in selected cities, certainly Montreal and potentially in Toronto, but I think in other cities, you could see a scenario where you get that 13 to 16%, right? I mean, I know that at BC Place, they're looking at that as a potential model, 13 to 16% of capacity for an entire stadium, not just a lower bowl. I think you could see that in places like Saskatchewan and Winnipeg and things of that nature. How can we set up our stadiums to keep people socially distant in the concourses, in the bathroom lines, and so on, right? Just to keep things as safe as possible and still keep a small amount of revenue rolling in. I think the universities in the U.S. are looking at that. I think it's imperative, whereas in the NFL it isn't. You can still be profitable with empty stadiums. I think the CFL is probably going to be looking at some form of attendance if possible.
Lastly, sorry to keep you so long, but one of our viewers has a good question. It's Nelson. He said, if hub cities aren't realistic, which you mentioned, what is realistic then if they're optimistic to get back playing?
Well, look, I think there's going to be a minimum amount of testing, and I think there's going to be social distancing or physical distancing requirements in place. Now, how closely can you monitor that with CFL players? I don't know, right? I mean, can you keep guys in their rooms and in their homes? That's what baseball is expecting their players to do. That's what the NFL, from what I'm told, and I haven't seen their documents, I've looked at all the MLB stuff, I think that's going to be the expectation in their home cities. So I think there'll be a lot of physical distancing parameters in stadium, in practice facilities, and in home. And then there's going to be a reasonable amount of testing, as opposed to the NFL, which is probably looking at an excessive amount of testing. But the big thing I'm curious for in all of this, Rod, and it's an issue that's come up a lot in the last 3 to 4 days, more so than at any time previously, insurance. Because I know the NHL is going through that right now with its policies, because you're getting a number of different insurance policies that are putting non-pandemic clauses in them. So if you're an NHL player, and, we find out so much more about this disease every day and every week, because when it first started, it was all about people above 60 and above 65 and people with respiratory issues. Now, you're seeing that it does affect young people, and there could be a long-term effect in terms of what it could do to lung capacity and things of that nature. So if you're an NHL player, and this example was brought to me, and you think you're fine enough to play, and then all of a sudden you get the virus, and when you return, you get some lung issues, and now you've only got 60% of your lung capacity when you return. And that's what your reality is for the rest of your life. You could live a decent life, but you can't play sports again. Are you covered? So how does that work in a CFL environment? I think those are all questions that all these leagues are going to be asking, in terms of insurance coverage, liability, if there's any long-term ramifications for anybody that winds up testing positive.
That is an outstanding update. I appreciate it, Farhan. Obviously, we're following very closely your reports. Stay safe out there, and I appreciate the time.
All right, my friend. Always enjoy being on with you.
Thank you. TSN's Farhan Lalji from Vancouver.
You're watching Rod Pedersen On Demand. For more of The Rod Pedersen Show, visit rodpedersen.com or follow Rod Pedersen on social media.